Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Mr. BuildWealth. I am back at it again. If this is your first time joining me, I'm here to share information and resources that can help you get started with building wealth. And as always, I want to make sure that I put my website in here because I want you to check me out. See what I'm into, see some of the articles that I've written. Just read what I'm trying to give to the world. This is not it's not like a scheme. I am trying every day to do what I can to disrupt generational poverty. And the title for this session is Rich versus Poor. I think about this a lot, and it's very clear when I'm out running. So the other day, I was riding with my fiance. She had a house to show in the Oakland Hills, a very nice area in Oakland. And I said, I'll ride with you because I want to run back down the hill and then I'll run home. And so I'm always aware of just what's around me. And when you look at, I'll say, rich or wealthier communities, there's this feeling that you get. I almost want to say when you're in certain neighborhoods, you just feel safe or you feel unsafe. And so I'm running through the hills or down the hill, and I run through this park, and there are parks everywhere in Oakland or any major. This is probably applicable to every major metropolitan city, where within a few minutes, maybe even a few blocks, or across a railroad track, you can visibly see the difference. So the park that I ran through, it's clean. These are city-run parks, right? But, certain areas and neighborhoods, they just don't clean it well enough, or they can't keep it clean because of, the residents, which tend to be homeless people. But there were no homeless people in this park in the hills. People out running, had their dogs, no leashes, nobody's acting up. It was just a nice family environment. And as soon as I got through the hills and I'm running back down, you kind of start to see it, right? You can see all the houses are a little bit nicer, and the houses and I'll say the lawns are well kept and manicured. And it's almost like everybody has this kind of unspoken feeling towards pride. We want to be prideful of where we live. So therefore we need to keep our lawns cut, hedges trimmed. We don't have 1,000 cars sitting out in the streets that are broken down. And if you're into cars, usually, people in wealthier neighborhoods just have a garage. So they don't even have to take up space in their driveway or on the street because they actually have a facility that they can put all their cars and do all their fun tinkering around. And so I think about this all the time, where are poor people happy being poor? And I know it sounds kind of crazy to ask that question, but again, I ran from the hills, I run back down to the flats, and then you kind of get this feeling of they don't take as much pride in where they live, and it's primarily because these people don't own. So you have a lot more apartment complexes in these areas, and so therefore, all renters aren't created equally, let alone homeowners. But you kind of feel that difference of when there's that sense of ownership, because wealthy people tend to own their houses and properties and, buildings and all that kind of stuff. So you get that level of pride of, I own this. So therefore, I want to keep it up and keep it looking nice. And if it's my neighborhood, I want to make sure the neighborhood looks and feels just kind of the same way. And if you have children, you want your children to be safe. When they go to that park, you don't want to have to worry that some drug addict or homeless person is talking to your kids. I mean, I understand you want them to live in reality. We know that that there are the haves and the have-nots. But in these rich or wealthier communities, the kids are almost kind of insulated. They're literally insulated from this other world until maybe they drive down this hill and go through a certain neighborhood. So it's interesting to kind of, as I'm running, back in the flats area, again, you look at the people, they just look different. They look like they've been struggling. There's a different look. And I think about when you have money and wealth, things happen to you too, right? Life will happen to all of us. But when life has been a struggle, there's this physical thing that's happening. You may have more wrinkles. You may be in your early 30s, but you look, 50 if you struggle. Flip that. You may look like you're in your 50s, but you may be 30 something years old, right? You've had a tough life. And the same thing kind of applies when you look at the houses, the vehicles, just think about litter. Like when you go into rich or wealthy communities, do you see litter? I never do. Like there's somebody always picking that up. Like sometimes it's not even the rare cases that I've seen some litter. And let's say I've driven past this neighborhood, multiple times in a day or a week. Like you won't see it the next day because somebody just takes pride and picks up the trash. So even in poor or underserved communities, they got garbage cans too. But the trash never makes it in there. And people just throw shit down. Like I've even seen it where I live. So I am very close to a very popular area in Oakland. It's called Lake Merritt. And I'm not far from the lake. And so I run through different streets and all through these neighborhoods just to kind of get a sense of, I know the lake is right there, but in between the lake and where I live, you have a lot of different types of people is what I'll say. Like you can tell who's got the money, who doesn't in this like less than a mile's worth of distance from where I'm at to the lake. Like you can kind of sense, okay, this isn't a great street to live on if you got kids. Or, oh, there's another homeless encampment over there that's not far from here. Or that, there's prostitution. There's so much stuff that happens. You're hearing a lot of the sirens because, again, it's just certain communities attract certain types of people and certain types of attention. So I think about people who grow up in these communities. Are they happy? And if they are, you don't need to move into your big old house. Like you don't need to move. But these poor communities, I think they aspire to live like the rich people, but they don't necessarily want to live where the rich people live because you want to be around people who you like. But there's no sense of pride in some of these areas. And when you look at like people who rent, like they just trash the place because they don't own it. Like when you own something, you take a lot better care of it because you own it. But renters, and I'm not talking about all renters, they just don't care about keeping up. Like they may not, maybe something like, I don't know, maybe there's some mold because they don't clean enough. They don't care because they know they can just move out and it's somebody else's problem. But when you own it, you tend to want to take better care. Like just drive through the hood. Like drive through any hood in America. This is any hood. You just see cars out in the street. Some of them are abandoned. Some of them just haven't worked in probably a decade. And you know that they don't have the space at the house to keep it. So it just stays out in the street. So most big cities don't have a lot of parking because a lot of disabled vehicles just hang out. They're everywhere. They're not in some lot, nice and organized. But there are body shops in wealthier neighborhoods, but they're all like fenced in and all the cars are kind of stacked there. You can just feel it, man. Like, I think it hurts me because what happens when people talk about gentrification, it ain't just a white-black thing. Like, all types of people are realizing that if I could buy property in an area that's not expensive, it just makes good sense financially. So there are a lot of black gentrifiers. So it ain't just a black and white thing. They're Asian, Indian, Hispanic. Like it's not a white thing. It's just you're taking advantage of your situation. You got the money, but your money can go further if you move into a certain neighborhood. And then you have other people who just flat out avoid these areas because of the quote unquote stigma. Well, it's too close to this homeless encampment. I get it, right? You got to think about what's in your best interest. But you can see physically the differences between these communities. And in some cities is again, a block over, you can see the difference. Across the train tracks, across that bridge, you go 2 blocks or 3 blocks to the right or the left and you're like, oh, wrong side of town. And you can feel it. You can feel it. And if you know anybody who lives in a gated community, like it's just when you drive up, you just like want to poke your chest. Like you just feel good because like it's safe. You're not going to get mugged. Like, you just feel so much different when you hang out in rich or wealthier neighborhoods. And then in those poor communities, like, you're always like, I gotta watch my back. Somebody, may roll up on me. You're just a little more on edge. And how I know this? So when I run through, I'll say, more affluent neighborhoods, and they're all kind of intertwined within Oakland. But when I run through them, you can kind of like see the people. Like, I'm just running in the street or on the sidewalk, and people kind of wave at you and understand that, fitness is important. But then when I'm running through like the hood, if I don't yell at the person, let's say I'm approaching somebody on the sidewalk, and this is funny, especially if it's deep East Oakland, which I run through. Like, if I am coming up on somebody on the sidewalk, male or female, I just yell that I'm approaching them. Because when I didn't do this, if it was a guy, like if it was a male, they would always turn around with their fist up. Now clearly you can hear me coming. Like, I'm not trying to tiptoe. I would run over trash. And it's just, people are so on edge when you're in these communities that me just running by freaks them out. Which lets me know you don't feel safe in this neighborhood. And yes, I'm a black man running. So it's just funny that when you're running through certain neighborhoods and different places, everybody's outside running because they understand fitness and health. But when you're running through the hood, I mean, you got to kind of go above and beyond the call of duty to alert somebody that you're coming. And this all comes back to, like, what do people really want in their lives? Like, do you really want to do better? Do you? Like, again, if you grew up in a certain neighborhood anywhere in this country, if the neighborhood is supportive of everything that you've been doing, if you feel safe, if your kids feel safe, if there's quality schools around, I don't think it really matters from that sense. But when you start looking at the data of the people who live in certain zip codes, it's very easy to see there's a clear separation of y'all are poor, y'all are rich. Y'all are wealthy, y'all ain't figured it out yet. And so you see these situations in all these cities across the country where it's very clear that if you're living in certain neighborhoods, and it's always an exception, so let me say there's always an exception, but the overwhelming majority of the rich neighborhoods, there's only a certain type of person who's going to go in there. And I know when you may be black or brown in this country, you may not feel comfortable being in the white neighborhood. And I get it. You're the only one. Like, I talk to people who have children, and you can hear it from the kids around what they experience. Like, if you're, let's say, a little black boy or black girl, you're in an all-white school, you don't realize the world is racist. And you don't realize until it's right in your face. And so I hear stories around children in these private schools or these schools where they're the only black, child in there. It's just their entire experience is so different. And it's not fair to the kids because the parents always said, well, we would do better for our children. And I think there's only one piece, is that you've done better by living in a different zip code, but now your child is missing out on the culture. And so when they get into the actual adult world, they may crumble because they've never experienced like their own. And this is where you find this kind of these battles in certain communities where, you're the one who got out the hood, went to the private school, went away, and then the hood continues to judge you for going away and being prosperous. Isn't that crazy? Like, they judge you. So now you feel disconnected from where you grew up only because your parents decided to do something a little bit different. And so if you're not willing to live in these neighborhoods, how about you focus on doing more in your current neighborhood? If you want to see the neighborhood change, you got to do something. Yeah, there's going to be some money involved. There's going to be some political stuff that's involved. But rich and wealthy communities do it all day long. Like, they don't think twice about what they want to happen. Like, they just execute. Here's what we want to have happen. And this is how, like, generational legacies are created, is that nobody drops the ball. If I grew up rich, I want to stay rich. And if I grew up poor, I should want to not to be poor. But the problem is you get caught in these lifestyles and this mindset. And so the poor community never comes up because it's, well, I don't see anybody close enough who's doing the work. So this is why I'm always stressing the importance of financial planning and you being courageous to Be the person in your family to change the narrative. A lot of poor people have gotten rich and have stayed rich and created massive, trust funds and real estate portfolios and businesses, and they did it. They did it. So I think everybody who lives in these underserved communities, I think they want to do more, but sometimes don't know where to go. And here's the sad thing too, or I should say the scary thing, is that the people who grow up in these neighborhoods, they have this kind of broke or poor person's mentality. So even when they get the money, they blow it. So think about like your celebrities, your athletes, some of your corporate people who have the title, look good, but like they're still thinking as if they were living in the hood. Like you can't ever forget where you've come from, but some of those same maybe habits are now preventing you from achieving even greater things in your life. So you make the money, but you still don't on paper look like a person who's successful. Because the world is judging you on how much stuff you got, how much money you have in the bank, but nobody talks about that. But the world is always going to judge you. And so what happens is once you adopt, I'll call it the wealthy mindset, then you can get out the hood. You don't ever have to forget about the hood, but I don't think anybody sits around and says, I love being poor. I don't think anybody fantasizes about being poor and always struggling. I don't think there's one person in their right mind who has that type of dream, who fantasizes about, you know what, I just want to be poor. I just want to not be able to pay my rent. I just want to not be able to retire. I just don't want to do all the right things to be happy, or what I see happiness bringing, right? I don't want that. I don't think people think that way, but our actions are showing it. That's why I do what I do. I want everybody to live out the dreams that they have every day. I dream of doing X, Y, and Z. Well, let's put the financial plan in place so we can achieve X, Y, and Z. Look, if you're finding yourself stuck and you can't figure out where to go, I'm not going to stop asking. Just set up a 15-minute phone call with me. Let's talk money for real, for real. So that's the link in my bio on Instagram. Let's talk money. Give me 15 minutes, maybe 30. If you need an hour, so be it. If you need more, I'm with it. But we got to start somewhere, because I'm seeing the difference every day in life, and I'm hearing how certain communities speak versus others, and I'm seeing the results. And it's the results is where I want to focus on. So if you are finding yourself stuck and you got that hurdle or roadblock or whatever it is that's stopping you from being great financially, we need to talk. We need to talk. If I did a survey of everybody who's quote unquote poor or in an underserved community, there's not going to be a hand raised that says, I'm happy being poor. You will not see that. So let's all get rich. And then once we get rich, because there's levels, once we get some of those riches that we dream and fantasize about, now let's solidify it and then get wealthy. Because then it's a little bit tougher to get rid of wealth. Like rich, you can make the money, lose the money. Wealth, it sticks. It's sticky. So if you're poor, let's get rich. And once you're rich, let's get wealthy. All right, everybody. If you need me, you know where to find me. Talk to you next time.